Samuel Sam Washington, a 68-year-old black man, often found himself lost in his own thoughts while working at Hawthorne University in Charlotte, North Carolina. He pushed his floor-cleaning cart through the long red-tiled hallway, the squeak of its wheels piercing the bustling sound of college students passing by. One afternoon, as he paused near room 402, where an open math class was about to begin, Sam's gaze was suddenly drawn outside through the large window. His deep brown eyes, sharp yet distant, wandered toward the swaying maple trees, as if he stood before an entirely different world. Students moved around him, but he paid no mind, broom handle in hand, standing still like a faint shadow amid the crowd. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. The mid-afternoon sunlight cast warm streaks across the hallway of Hawthorne University, where red brick buildings stood firm amid rows of lush maple trees. It was a fall afternoon in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the corridors buzzed with the hum of students chatting, the scrape of chairs on floors, as they prepared for classes. Room 402 was no exception. The noise of energetic young people echoed through its slightly open door. Sam Washington, in his dark blue janitor's uniform, walked slowly down the hall, his worn shoes tapping lightly on the floor. He paused near the room's door, his eyes flicking to the window, where a calmer scene seemed to await him. Near the end of the hallway, by the large window, Samuel Sam Washington stood quietly, broom in hand. He was a reserved man, his demeanor blending easily into the university's background. His sharp yet often distant brown eyes drifted outside, where a few maple leaves fell gently in the wind, a sparrow hopping along a low wooden fence. He set his cleaning cart aside, his hand brushing the pocket where he kept a small worn leather notebook, an ever-present companion no one noticed. His posture was relaxed, almost too much so, one hand resting on the broom, the other lightly scratching his chin, as if the world beyond the window captivated him more than the students' clamor behind him. The scene outside, swaying trees, sunlight dancing on the ground, seemed to hold Sam longer than he intended. He wasn't absent-minded out of laziness. His mind was sharp, always working faster than his janitorial tasks required. Numbers and equations fascinated him, but the monotony of mopping floors and emptying trash couldn't spark that passion. Instead of chatting or joining the campus bustle, he let his mind drift, finding solace in the quiet rhythm of the world outside. That notebook in his pocket, though small, held secrets, pages filled with advanced equations he solved during brief breaks. Sam wasn't distracted from disinterest. He had a keen mind, a fierce love for math he kept hidden. His janitorial work at Hawthorne was just a shell, mopping floors, changing bulbs, taking out trash, but his mind soared beyond those duties. He often let his thoughts wander to complex problems, calculations he'd scribbled in his notebook during long nights at home. He never spoke up or boasted. He let his mind roam, finding joy in the stillness of numbers. That notebook, though mostly blank in its main pages, was crammed with advanced formulas and problems in the margins, challenges he set for himself in spare moments. The noise from room 402 quieted as the door shut behind the last students. Out in the hall, Sam lingered, still gripping the broom. His gaze shifted from the window, briefly glancing at the dark wooden door now closed. Inside, Eleanor Pierce, a renowned math professor at Hawthorne University, stood at the front, arms crossed, her sharp eyes scanning the settling students. She wore a tailored blazer, her silver-streaked hair neatly pinned back, exuding unmistakable authority. With years of teaching experience, Eleanor prided herself on spotting potential in students, but she was also known for her razor-sharp tongue and impatience with those who fell short of her expectations. On the teacher's desk, a stack of graded tests sat neatly, the white sheets stark under the classroom's fluorescent light. Eleanor had marked them last night, and the results displeased her. A few students scored decently, but most were average or worse. To her, this was unacceptable. She tolerated no mediocrity, and the sight of low grades made her wonder if these students were truly trying, as she demanded. She picked up the stack, calling names and handing back papers with curt remarks. "Adequate," she said to one, her tone icy. "You need to study more," she told another, her eyes flashing disappointment. As she passed the row near the door, where Sam stood in the hall, she glimpsed his figure through the small glass pane. He was mopping, but his gaze drifted to the window, his dreamy air making her pause for a second. Sam didn't notice Eleanor Pierce's stare. He continued his work, pushing the cart slowly down the hall, his hands moving in a familiar rhythm. The little notebook in his pocket brushed his chest with each bend, a reminder of his private world, where numbers and equations brought peace. This job never could. Inside room 402, Eleanor turned back to her students, setting the tests down with a soft but firm thud that drew attention. "All right, listen up." Her voice sliced through the remaining murmurs, silencing the room. She leaned against the desk, her piercing gaze sweeping every face. "Most of you did adequately," she began, though her tone suggested she didn't mean it. "But many of you are still struggling with basics we've reviewed for weeks." Sam, outside, faintly caught Eleanor's voice through the door. He wasn't really listening. His mind drifted back to the scene outside, where sunlight faded over the maples. He propped the broom against the wall, hands on hips, watching a sparrow flit from branch to branch. The breeze whistling through the cracked window drew him more than Eleanor's critiques inside. He didn't realize her sharp eyes had darted through the glass and landed on him. A flicker of irritation crossed her face as she saw him standing there, seemingly oblivious to everything around him. "This is basic algebra," Eleanor continued, her voice rising slightly, resonating through the room. "You need to grasp this if you want to succeed in college, in life, anywhere." She paused, her gaze sweeping over bowed heads, some scribbling, others avoiding her eyes. Then it flicked outside again, where Sam stood, hand on the broom, staring into the distance. A surge of annoyance rose in her. She didn't know him beyond an aging janitor, but his dreamy detachment, as if nothing mattered, grated on her. Used to controlling everything in her sight, Sam, though just a figure in the hall, felt like a small challenge she couldn't ignore. Sam lingered there, hand brushing the pocket with his notebook, unaware Eleanor Pierce was watching. He didn't hear her critiques, didn't realize his silence. His shield against trouble was drawing the attention of someone who despised indifference. Inside, Eleanor's sharp voice cut through the air like a blade. "This is basic algebra," she said, her tone climbing with frustration. "You'll need it to succeed in college, in life, anywhere." She paused, her icy gaze sweeping the silent students, some ducking her stare. A sharper spark of irritation flashed in her eyes, stronger than before. Eleanor Pierce straightened, stepping away from the desk, taking a few strides toward the classroom window. She saw Sam clearer now, an older man in a dark blue janitor's uniform, hand on the broom, eyes lost in the distance, as if nothing in the room warranted his notice. That indifference, even if unintentional, felt like a challenge to her. "Samuel Washington," she suddenly called, her voice cracking the silence like a hammer. The shout startled Sam, his hand slipping off the broom, tipping it slightly, before he caught it. His heart raced, heat rising to his cheeks, as he turned to peer through the glass. The students inside turned too, curious eyes fixing on the door, whispers stirring. "Yes, ma'am," Sam mumbled, his voice so soft, it was nearly inaudible. He nudged his cart aside, stepping slowly toward the door, his trembling hand grazing the knob. Eleanor narrowed her eyes, her tone edged with mockery. "You seem awfully fascinated with what's out there," she said, nodding toward the window. "Care to share what's so interesting?" Sam opened his mouth to reply, then closed it, unsure what to say. He stood there, hand on the knob, feeling the students' stares like tiny pins through the glass. A few giggles rose from the room, but Eleanor didn't smile. She stepped closer to the desk, picking up a marker, her gaze cold. "Let's see if you're paying attention," she continued, her voice sharp as a knife. "Come in." The room fell silent, as Sam pushed the door open, his shoes scuffing the wood floor distinctly. The students turned to watch, their eyes a mix of amusement and curiosity. Whispers rippled through the rows. "What's she gonna do with the janitor?" one student murmured to another. "He probably doesn't know anything," another replied, stifling a laugh. Sam swallowed hard, his palms sweating as he stepped forward. Each step stretched endlessly, the distance from the door to the whiteboard at the front, feeling farther than ever. Eleanor Pierce stood by the whiteboard, the marker twirling lightly between her fingers. She eyed Sam inscrutably, then began writing an equation, a complex one, full of variables and fractions, far beyond what the open-class students had studied. She wrote swiftly, her strokes firm, then stepped aside, handing the marker to Sam. "Go on," she said, her tone tinged with challenge. "Show us what you can do." Sam took the marker, the cool plastic, pressing into his palm. He stood before the board, staring at the equation, his mind reeling. The whispers and soft laughs from the students behind him cut like tiny blades, the pressure mounting. His heart pounded, and for a fleeting moment, he considered handing the marker back and walking out. The equation Eleanor Pierce had written was a tangled maze of variables, exponents, and fractions, a complex problem even the best students in this open class hadn't encountered. The whispers and muffled laughs from the crowd behind him stung like needles, piercing his pride. "No way he solves that," one student muttered skeptically. "He probably doesn't even know where to start," another added, stifling a chuckle. Sam's shoulders tensed, but he didn't turn. Instead, he stared at the problem, his mind sharpening, the numbers on the board slowly coming into focus. Eleanor Pierce stood a few steps away, arms crossed, one eyebrow raised in doubt. To her, this wasn't just a test for Sam, but a lesson in attention, a way to prove even a dreamy janitor couldn't escape her grasp. She'd always bristled at inattention, and Sam's distant gaze in the hall only fueled her desire to put him on the spot. "Well," she said, her voice cutting the silence, "we're waiting." Sam took a deep breath, gripping the marker, his first strokes hesitant, testing the waters, but as he moved from step to step, his hand steadied. At first, the students didn't react. Some expected him to give up, return the marker, and shuffle out in embarrassment. But as the numbers and symbols on the board began to connect, whispers spread. "Wait, is he actually doing it?" a girl in the second row murmured, leaning forward. "It looks right," her friend replied, surprised. Sam ignored them. His mind raced, breaking the problem into manageable parts. He worked methodically, isolating variables, simplifying fractions, cutting unnecessary steps. His hand moved faster, the marker's squeak on the whiteboard steady, filling the room's silence. The complex equation Eleanor Pierce had written wasn't unsolvable, but it demanded a deep understanding she didn't think a janitor like Sam could have. He started by grouping terms, applying algebraic rules to simplify each section. His writing was clear, coherent, uncluttered. He laid out each step, one line flowing logically to the next, unraveling a knot no one else saw. The students quieted, giggles fading, replaced by wide eyes and gaping mouths. Even the loudest laughers now leaned forward, lips parted in shock. Eleanor Pierce stepped closer to the board, her eyes locked on Sam's work. She'd expected him to fail, or at least falter, but as she studied his steps, surprise crept in. Sam's process was clear, precise, flawless. She took another step, her sharp gaze scanning each symbol, searching for a mistake to prove he couldn't do it. There was none. Sam paused, reviewing his work, then pressed on to the final steps. He felt the crowd's eyes but used it as fuel, not fear. He wrote the last numbers, circled the answer, and capped the marker with a soft, decisive click. Sam stepped back, facing the room. His heart still raced, but his face stayed calm, betraying no emotion. The whiteboard behind him was now covered in neat lines, each step leading to the next, ending in the correct solution. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was so thick, the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead became the only sound. Sam scanned the crowd, meeting wide eyes and stunned faces. Even students who'd never noticed him now stared with near reverent awe. Eleanor Pierce stood by the board, her heels clicking softly as she approached to inspect Sam's work. Her index finger traced the lines, lips moving silently as she mentally checked, hunting for any error to dismiss what she'd seen. Her face tightened at a midway step, then relaxed as she saw it was still correct. Finally, she turned to Sam, her eyes a mix of surprise, irritation, and reluctant respect. "It's correct," she said, her voice quieter than usual, as if admitting it took effort. A wave of murmurs swept the students, followed by louder applause, as if Eleanor's confirmation unleashed emotions they couldn't hold back. Sam stood there, unsure what to do with his hands. He shoved them in his pockets, then pulled them out, his cheeks warming under the sudden attention. The applause rang in his ears, but he wasn't used to this. Not the earlier humiliation, but something new, a pride he'd never known. The students now saw him differently. Unbelievable. A girl in the middle row whispered to her friend. "He just solved that?" Her friend replied, awestruck. A few stood, clapping harder, as if they'd witnessed an unexpected performance. Even the biggest laughers fell silent, their eyes tinged with regret as they looked at Sam. Eleanor Pierce raised a hand, silencing the crowd. The clapping faded, though some still stared at Sam like he was a marvel unveiled before them. She turned to him, her gaze less icy, though still edged with her usual pride. "All right," she said, her voice clear in the quiet. "What you just saw wasn't luck." She pointed to the whiteboard, where Sam's solution stood pristine. "This is what happens when someone takes the time to deeply understand. Mr. Washington didn't just solve this, he broke it down, step by step, and made it look easy. That's real comprehension." Eleanor's words hung in the air, and for the first time, Sam didn't want to shrink into the shadows. He stood a bit taller, hands relaxed at his sides, though his eyes held a hint of shyness. The students murmured, but not to mock. "He's actually good," a guy in the back said, impressed. "I didn't even understand the problem," another added, chuckling without malice. A student named Marcus, who'd chatted with Sam in the cafeteria a few times, stood clapping again. "Sam deserves props," he shouted, sparking laughs and more applause. Sam stared at his worn shoes, unsure how to handle the attention. His cheeks burned, but a growing pride flickered inside, a quiet flame he'd never dared let grow. Eleanor Pierce stepped closer, her tone softening, almost friendly, a rarity for her. "Mr. Washington," she said, "why didn't you ever say anything? If you can do this, why stand in the hall and stay silent?" Sam hesitated, his eyes dropping to the floor, then lifting to meet hers. He didn't know how to explain the fear of notice, the comfort of invisibility. After a moment, he shrugged, his voice soft. "I didn't think anyone would care," he said, almost a whisper. Eleanor studied him, her gaze softening further. "Well," she said firmly, "it's time that changed." The applause still echoed in Sam's ears as he stepped back. Though he'd set the marker on the desk, his hands clenched slightly, reluctant to let go. His eyes swept the thinning room, a stillness settling after the ovation. The students' praise and stunned looks lingered in his mind, but he wasn't used to the spotlight. Eleanor Pierce stood at the front, arms crossed, watching the students file out, her thoughts elsewhere. As the door closed behind the last one, she turned to Sam, her voice gentle but firm. "Mr. Washington, can you stay a moment?" Sam hesitated, a flicker of unease in his eyes as he nodded. He shuffled toward the desk, where Eleanor stood, his old shoes scuffing the wood floor. The room was quiet now, just the hum of the fluorescents, and their steady breathing. Eleanor leaned against the desk, looking at Sam with an unreadable expression, no longer arrogant, but curious, tinged with something deeper. She took a breath, then spoke, her voice quieter than usual. "Mr. Washington, I owe you an apology." Sam blinked, unsure if he'd misheard. He stood still, hands in his pockets, waiting. Eleanor nodded, as if affirming it to herself. "I've taught here a long time," she began, glancing briefly at the window where Sam once daydreamed, and I've always thought I understood the people around me, students, colleagues, even people like you, but with you, she paused, choosing her words, I misjudged. I saw you in the hall, saying nothing, doing nothing but mopping, and I thought you didn't care. I assumed your silence meant indifference. I was wrong. Sam shifted his feet, uneasy with her candor. It's fine, he mumbled, barely audible. No, it's not, Eleanor countered, her tone firming. She stepped from the desk, closer to him. You have a gift, Mr. Washington, and I don't want to see it wasted. Do you realize how rare this is? A man your age, in your job, solving a problem my students couldn't touch. You think in ways I haven't seen in this room. Sam bowed his head, fingers tracing the notebook's edge in his pocket. He didn't know what to say. I don't know, he said softly, hesitant. I just like doing it. It makes sense to me. Eleanor looked at him, her gaze warming. That's what makes it special, she said, her voice gentler. You see things differently, and that's something to be proud of. But you can't keep it to yourself forever. She paused, considering, then continued. There are programs, community math groups here in Charlotte. They're for people like you, people who need a challenge, a space to grow. I can help you join, if you'd like. Sam looked up, his heart quickening. The idea of stepping beyond his quiet comfort was thrilling yet terrifying. He thought of the long nights with his notebook, solving problems for himself. But now, maybe they could be more. I don't know, Sam admitted, his voice trembling. What if I mess up? Eleanor smiled, a rare, genuine one. Messing up is part of learning, she said. But if you don't try, you'll never know how far you can go. Sam stood there, hand on the notebook, eyes drifting to the whiteboard, where his solution remained. He recalled writing that final answer, the crowd's applause, and the shift in Eleanor's gaze. Sam left the room, his shoes echoing in the empty hall. Eleanor's offer echoed in his mind, a chance to join a community math group, to turn his worn notebook's problems into something bigger. He stepped outside, the fading afternoon light spilling over the maples, but this time he didn't pause to daydream. Instead, he headed home, his thoughts tangled with what she'd said. If you don't try, you'll never know how far you can go. For the first time in years, Sam felt an urge, not to retreat, but to step forward. A few days later, Sam decided to try. He attended the first meeting of the community math group Eleanor recommended, held in a small room at Hawthorne. He walked in, clutching his notebook, palms sweating, as he saw young faces, college students, a few teachers, and math enthusiasts from across Charlotte. At first, he hung back, standing in the corner, eyes scanning whiteboards, full of formulas and lively chatter. But when a tough problem stumped the group, Sam took a deep breath, stepped up, and began writing. His strokes, neat and precise, as in room 402, silenced the room, then sparked awe as he circled the answer. From then on, Sam became part of the group. He didn't just join, he started helping others, explaining steps with patience, honed from years of solitary study. The students dubbed him Math Sam, a nickname that first flustered him, but soon brought a smile. At Hawthorne, his reputation grew. Students who'd seen him solve that problem spread the story, and soon he was no longer the invisible janitor. They sought him out during breaks, asking for help with homework, or just how he thought so clearly. Sam, still quiet, began to feel he belonged. One evening, Sam sat at his kitchen table in his small Charlotte suburb home, notebook open before him. His wife, Clara, a kind woman with silver hair and a warm smile, walked in, setting a hot tea beside him. "How was today, Sam?" she asked, sitting across from him. He looked up, a spark of pride in his eyes. "They call me Math Sam," he said, his voice soft but joyful. Clara smiled, resting her hand on his. "I always knew you were special," she said gently. "I'm glad others see it now." Sam recounted the math group, how he helped a student grasp a tough problem, and their applause when he finished. Clara listened, her eyes glowing, as if she'd waited for this day forever. Sam glanced at his notebook, fingers tracing its yellowed pages. Once, it was just a keeper of secrets, problems he solved alone, formulas written in silence. Now he jotted new ideas, not just to solve but to share. He recorded the group's problems, noting how he explained them, as if the notebook now bridged him to the outside world. He no longer hid it in his pocket. He brought it to meetings, set it on the table, and for the first time, felt those numbers could inspire others too. At Hawthorne, Sam was no longer the dreamy figure in the hall. Students greeted him as he pushed his cart, some stopping to chat. "Mr. Sam, can you help with this?" a girl asked, showing her math book. Sam paused, studied the problem, and explained step by step with the patience he'd once reserved for himself. Moments like these made him feel different, no longer invisible, no longer forgotten. He began to see that his talent, once a private pastime, could belong to this community. Sam entered the community math group's small meeting room at Hawthorne one evening, holding his worn leather notebook, now thickened with new pages. The students and Charlotte math lovers waited, eyes lighting up at his arrival. "Mr. Sam's here," a young man cheered, sparking group laughter. Sam gave a small smile, set his notebook down, and stepped to the whiteboard. He began explaining a tough problem they'd wrestled with all week. His voice slow but clear, each step written with familiar precision. The crowd listened, some jotting notes, others nodding in awe. When he circled the final answer, warm, genuine applause erupted. Eleanor stood in the corner, watching from afar. She didn't often join this group, but today she came for Sam, the janitor who'd made her rethink herself. Arms crossed, she followed his strokes, a rare smile flickering on her lips. Unusual for someone so stern. She recalled room 402, challenging Sam to mock him, only to be stunned by his skill. Sam's journey shifted how she saw things, not just him, but those she'd overlooked due to appearance or circumstance. She realized talent didn't pick age or status, vowing not to let bias blind her again. As the applause died down, Sam stepped from the board, hands relaxed at his sides. He looked at the crowd, young faces, admiring eyes, and felt a new purpose. He was no longer the unseen janitor rolling a cart through Hawthorne's halls. He was Math Sam, an inspiration, proof that brilliance could shine anywhere, anytime. He went home that night, lighter than ever, and sat at his kitchen table in his small Charlotte suburb home. Clara stepped in, resting a hand on his shoulder. "I'm so proud of you, Sam," she said warmly. "You've always been special, but now the world sees it too." Sam looked up at her, a small smile breaking through. "Thanks, Clara," he said, soft but sincere. He glanced at the open notebook, pencil gliding lightly over the page. Once these pages hid his secrets, problems solved in silence, formulas for solace. Now it held possibilities. He didn't just write problems, he noted ideas, goals, dreams he'd never dared imagine. For the first time, Sam wasn't afraid to be seen. He was ready to step forward, to see how far his gift could take him. The next day, the air at Hawthorne shifted. As Sam walked the familiar hall, students greeted him with friendly nods, some waving from afar. "Mr. Sam, you were amazing yesterday," a girl called from down the hall, making him duck his head shyly. He was no longer the outsider daydreaming. He was part of this place, respected and liked. Eleanor Pierce, from her office, saw this through her window. She smiled, telling herself Sam's story was a reminder that everyone here, student or staff, might hold hidden potential, waiting to be found. That night, Sam sat at his kitchen table, dim light spilling over the notebook before him. He wrote a new problem, not to solve alone, but to share with the group. He paused, staring at the page, a calm certainty filling him. He didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid to face it. Clara stepped in, her gaze tender. "Building a future, aren't you?" she asked. Sam nodded, silent, but his smile said everything. Sam, the quiet janitor, who once hid in the shadows, was ready to step into the light. He'd not only found his true worth, but became a small spark warming and inspiring those around him. In that moment, under the kitchen's soft glow, he knew he'd found a path, not just through numbers, but for his life. The story of Samuel Sam Washington, a 68-year-old black janitor at Hawthorne University in Charlotte, North Carolina, reflects deep truths about today's American society, where biases about age, race, and status still quietly linger. Sam, with his math talent tucked in a worn leather notebook, was initially dismissed by Eleanor Pierce and the students simply for being an older janitor daydreaming in the hall. This echoes how many in America today are judged by their surface, from servers, delivery drivers, to manual laborers, with no one suspecting they might hold extraordinary skills. When Sam solved that complex equation to everyone's shock, it wasn't just a personal triumph, but a reminder that talent knows no bounds of job or age, a message especially poignant in an American society valuing diversity and inclusion. Sam's lesson for real life in the U.S. today is to dare to step out of your comfort zone and not let societal biases define your worth. Like Sam, overcoming his fear of attention, to join the math group, you too can pursue your passion, learning a new skill, joining a community project, or sharing ideas at work, no matter your age or job. Eleanor's shift from arrogance to respect urges us to look beyond appearances, actively seeking potential in coworkers, friends, or even strangers. In a land of opportunity like America, believe that, like Sam with his notebook, everyone has a problem worth solving. You just need to pick up the pen and start. Don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories, like Sam's journey. Thanks for joining us, and see you in the next video to uncover more hidden talents.